Marketers of the world, why do we work hard to solve small problems? It's time to bring home bigger paychecks. It's time to create the lifestyle we deserve and to make a greater impact. This is the Fractional CMO Show, and I'm Casey Stanton. Join me as we explore this growing industry and learn to solve bigger problems. The Fractional CMO Show is sponsored by CMOX, the #1 company to teach you how to attract, convert, and serve clients as an in-demand fractional CMO. Hey, it's Casey here with the Fractional CMO Show, and I'm here with the founder of Funeral Results Marketing, a digital marketing agency for funeral homes. He's also Funeral Boardroom's founder and fractional CMO for funeral homes, Robin Heppell. Rob's calling in from Victoria, British Columbia. Hey, Rob, excited to have you here.
Thanks, Casey. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. I'm super excited because I find your industry just like so kind of hidden in plain sight. I've obviously seen funeral homes. I've been to funeral homes, and it's just like such an interesting market that comes with it. I think a lot of just like general avoidance that people have. They don't want to think about death. And you just have like leaned in completely into this. I've learned so much in our conversations around so many interesting things that I think we'll get into on the call today. But first, I want us to like dive into this idea of kind of one of the things that makes a funeral service unique, which is someone has a pressing need and they need a service immediately. And if you don't win that, you don't get it. This happens in funeral homes. If a funeral home, if someone in a community passes away, the family looks for a funeral home. And if your funeral home doesn't get it, someone else will, and you'll never be able to win that business back. So I'd love for us to talk about capturing this intent-based traffic. How would you like to start this conversation?
Sure. Well, part of it is since like the mid 90s, there's been a push for funeral pre-planning, or people planning their funerals in advance. So we offer that out to people. Most people don't want to deal with it, as they're just avoiding it. But that part of the business is more like some traditional marketing, where there's a bit of a funnel and you've got time to work them through, get messages out there. You're going to interrupt them and have them come in. But that only maybe equates to 25% of the number of funerals that a funeral home looks after in a year. So the other part is people who avoid it, don't want to talk about it until it's time, the death has occurred. And you're right. So the cycle, I'll use for you and your listeners, like the sales cycle, and I wouldn't say that inside of ours, yeah. But and we would say, instead of like closing the deal, we would like winning the call, or the first call, right? And that's how we talk about it in the industry, is when that family makes that first call to the funeral home, that's actually the noun, right? Oh, we had 2 first calls last night, meaning It was the first time that the family reached out to us, and then things happen. And so the window is only a few hours, or maybe a day or 2 at the max, because after the death, because the deceased is somewhere and probably needs to get transferred somewhere else. They can't stay at the nursing home. The hospital doesn't want them to stay there. So
they're in the home, I would assume.
Right? Yeah, and they don't want the deceased to be in the home for too long either. Right. So there is a need for them to make a decision quickly. And there are a group of, if someone's been in a city or a town for a long time, they might be using the same funeral home that their parents did, or their grandparents, and there's, in some places there would be the Protestant funeral home and the Catholic funeral home and the Jewish funeral home. But as societies change, then we're trying to, and my job as a marketer to help them, is to get their reputation online and through being found in the search engines, and with online reviews, and that you're trying to hold out your presence online. And so you have this very short period of time to let these client families know, to choose your funeral home than someone else. And you're right. The very unique thing about funeral service is you've done all this work, you've done all this marketing, someone has to die for you to potentially get the business, and then your marketing has to work, and then the person fielding that, if there's an information call, they have to convey some rapport and confidence that that family would then choose you, because if they then choose that other funeral home, that opportunity is gone. You have to basically wait for the next person to pass away. So it's and so it can get quite competitive too, in depending in the different markets, right? If there's just a few funeral homes, they're fighting to serve every family that they can.
And I would assume that the commitment of a family is, oh, my grandma was buried here and I didn't have a bad time, so I'm going to bury my parents here. And it's just kind of there's like a lot of what's the word that you would use to kind of
loyalty, right? Yeah. So there'd be loyalty, but with in today's age, with places being so transient, right? Like people move around, and even lately we've seen lots of people moving from one place to another. Where I am in Victoria, we're on the west coast of Canada, and we've had so many people come and retire here. So it's very few Victorians that are actually born and raised here. I was, my dad was, but I'd say 80% of the population they were born somewhere else. So so there's no family legacy. There's no, they didn't use a funeral home before. And
there's no plot for them too, right?
Correct. And that's why Victoria is the highest, we have the highest cremation rate in North America, which is like 93%, roughly. Gosh. So in just, as an aside, in the US, I believe it's 58% overall. In Canada, it's a bit higher. I think it's like in the 60s. And British Columbia in itself is in the 80s. But there's also a lot of different groups or communities, and so there's still some ethnic groups that are always at burial, and so there's I don't think it's never going to be 100%, but there's here consistently we've been, when I started in 86, it was like 67%, and that was the highest, and then it's gone up from there, but it has leveled off for, I would say, the last 5 years or so at about 93%.
Got it. Okay. Got it. So this notion that like people are moving from a more traditional burial process of having a plot of land, their families has a plot of land. I live in Philadelphia, and we've got a couple graveyards that I've walked, and I see grandparents and parents and their kids, and kids that died of childbirth. Like it's a whole kind of story and family tree in a plot. But then those numbers stop. That stops at 1904 or 1915 or something like that. And then there's just no more burials. So the market is shifting to this cremation, which makes sense, because why would you want to be buried in the ground in a place that you just kind of lived in for a little while? There's like really no significance. No one's going to come visit you. So the market's kind of like fundamentally changing. I find that to be very interesting. And is that something that's happened recently? Is it over the last 10 years?
It's been happening longer than that, Casey. But with people moving and with the choice of cremation, so there's still a number of people that do get cremated that may have their cremated remains placed in that family plot, and depending on the cemetery, you might have like in the local cemetery here that's close to me, for every casket burial plot, you could have 2 sets of cremated remains. In the older cemetery downtown, you can have 3 urns per plot. Some churchyard cemeteries, you can have 6, 8, 10. They don't, there may not be the same restrictions. Cemeteries too are now also a business, right? So even though spatially you could physically put a number of urns in a plot, just for record keeping and keeping things organized, they include, or they allow, like say 2 or 3. So we also get some people that scatter their cremated remains. Some people will take their urn and have it sent back to the family. But maybe they've come from the Midwest or out east or overseas, and they're part of their cremated remains will be sent there, and
Right.
and that's common too, where they get separated. So maybe some are scattered here, some are back at the churchyard cemetery where they grew up, and some could be in Hawaii. People they have more options with cremated remains. So it's now depending on the person themselves, like if they have any specific wishes, or even the survivors, what they're going to choose to have that kind of lasting place for the deceased.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So, so kind of regardless of the transitory nature of things, like I mean, I guess that would probably even increase the pressure of the funeral home to get that first call, because there is no legacy here that says I went to this funeral home, because now I'm in another state or another city or whatever, and who gets that first call is really important. So this first call also happens with other things, I'm sure, like towing, like tow trucks, right? Like I need a tow. Who do I call? Well, you call your insurance company, but maybe you got to call someone else. It probably makes sense for emergency things. What emergency room am I going to go to? What urgent care facility am I going to go to? So this idea that there's intent-based, immediate need traffic. You mentioned you get in front of it a bit through like your reviews, your online presence, but give me more on that. Like, do you measure things like speed to lead? Do you want phone calls to come in? Is that the best thing? Do you want form submits? What matters the most?
Well, probably ideally you'd want them to pick up the phone and call, right? Because then there's a number of things, choices that they're going to have to make and decisions. And one of them is price. And because there has been a thought out there like, oh, gee, funerals are expensive, and I'm not saying that they're not. Caskets can be expensive, and so there is some what we would call shopping around, and we're not. I'm talking as a funeral director. It's not like we're great salespeople. We're in this very nurturing servant type business, right? And so it can be hard for people to express why someone should do business with you, and you have to go beyond to saying, well, we provide great service, because the client families want an idea of it doesn't mean that they want the cheapest, but they don't want to overspend either. And so there's this balance of that. What are the facilities? Do you offer different amenities? Like out here and out west, memorial receptions are really big. So local funeral home here has, they have catering. So it's not just the receptions. Like when I started, it would be like you go to the church basement after the service, and the ladies at the church would have made like egg salad sandwiches, and that would be the reception. Now it is $15-20 per person. You're getting quiches and hot hors d'oeuvres, and then they offer beer and wine, and so it's now part of the revenue structure.
Sure.
With more people that choose cremation, there's less revenue from a casket sale, but with that and with those changes, there's less people are going to church, so they don't have the same connection where they could, we'll just have the reception at the church. They're not belonging to something like that. So
they don't have a church. Oh, interesting.
Correct, yeah.
So where do they go? Like the VFW hall, or?
Well, no, they a lot of funeral homes, most jurisdictions now allow food to be served in the funeral homes, but there's some certain states around your area, Casey, that prevent food to be served at the funeral home, right? Even though there's a cafeteria at the hospital, something about food at the funeral home doesn't equate to the same. And my colleagues within the profession are, continue to battle that with their state regulators. But so where some people where it's changed, where people, maybe if people have become less religious, so maybe they're not getting buried and they're going to choose cremation, that same sentiment of being less religious is now they don't belong to the church where they'd had the reception. So here's a little fact, the term undertaker, which was used a century ago, actually has its origin of meaning as an entrepreneur. And the concept of the undertaker was they would undertake all the services that would go on when someone died, right? So they were the like my grandfather and great grandfather, they had the furniture store, and that's where the caskets were from. But they would do the embalming at the farmhouse. They would bring their little doctor bag out and do that there, and then they would look after the flowers, and they would organize the service to be at the church, and they'd so they
like the event manager, the doer, kind of the whole thing. Wow.
Correct. And so they undertook all the tasks that revolved around someone dying, and that's where the name came from. And then over time, in say the mid 50s, it became very they became more funeral directors, and funerals were very similar for everyone. You could see from beginning to end, they went through all these steps, and maybe they were at a church, maybe they were at the funeral home, but they were very similar. And then in the later part of last century, so maybe in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that's where more options came. Cremation started to become more popular, and so it changed again. And so in some parts, the funeral professionals are having to become almost like a born again undertaker, because so even though the family wants to get together with people, where they would have 20 years ago had that at the church, they don't have that anymore. So they could go to the country club, but the funeral home may have created their space into a place to hold that reception, and then serve the hors d'oeuvres and beer and wine, if that's what the family wanted. So it's a constantly shift of, we're still catering for all these tasks that revolve around when someone dies. They're just not the same as they were 100 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. That makes sense. Okay. So back to this kind of game of it being high stakes. You want that call to come in. What kind of ground game is needed to cover in order to be the preeminent solution? What do you think is important? Is it notoriety? Is it Trustpilot reviews? Is it just raw Google reviews? Like, what are some of these like core things that local service companies need to have that you think is critical?
I think that, and it's quite hard to convey, but they do want to have to show that they can provide a very meaningful service, right? So there are some places that may not put the effort into making that service as meaningful as maybe others. And some funeral homes can get a really great reputation on having very meaningful services, where others who maybe are a little bit stuck back in the times are holding on to the really formal, rigid type of traditional funeral service. And that's fine for some people. And the more progressive funeral homes can still offer that type of service. So they're again, we're dealing with this short period of time where you have to convey, like, we can, we're reasonably priced. We offer a variety of these services, and we'll help the family create a very meaningful service for their loved one. So that's how they try to convey that, but it's hard. Some people may, like, not every funeral home would have like a nice reception area, so that might be one key factor. And where maybe others are just located in a better location, maybe they're right beside the cemetery, or maybe they're closer to some other place in town. So there are some factors, and that zero moment of truth, once people make that decision, that information could have been gathered over time. Even if they've never chosen a funeral home, they probably aware of them. A lot of funeral directors are very involved in the community, so maybe they've met someone and they've built that rapport with them. But it can just be price too. If they don't want much, and and we hear this a lot, like, oh yeah, when dad died, or dad told us that when he dies, he just, don't spend any money on me, just put me in a cremation, like, just cremate me, and that's it. Put me in a pine box and cremate me. So funeral homes offer those more limited services also. So it's hard, right? And it's a balancing act of when I think the toughest thing that funeral homes wrestle with in our marketing services, we help them put their prices online. But if they're more expensive, if you just put a price list, it's very hard for the family to see like, well, why do these people charge a couple $1,000s more than these people in just written word, right? So that's why you're trying to convey the value
and get the call, right?
And get the call. That's the name of the game, because
people buy ultimately on emotion, and if you put too much logic in front of them, they're going to make a decision that isn't right for them. You want to choose the decision that makes the most sense. And I'm sure if the funeral homes that you support get people on phone calls, they're able to sell in a way that has lasting memory instead of just like price.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing though, because when we get a phone call, I'm talking as a funeral director, and if the first thing they ask about price, we have this immediate kind of, we take a step back and not offended, but close, like they're just asking for price. And it's not that, and I try to work with them and say, look, that price is just information that they're gathering. Just because they ask for it, it doesn't mean that it's the cheapest, but they kind of get on guard, and they and sometimes, and we work with them in training, and that not to think that this is it, right? That you have to have the lowest price, or some places will price match, right? If you go to Stanton Funeral Home, they're $5,000, but if you go to Heppell Funeral Home, you know what, we normally charge $6,000, but we'll do it for $5,000, so you don't have to go over there, right? Some of that happens sometimes, but I think a well-trained funeral director on the phone is going to receive that call, provide the information that they're asking for, and find out what other information is going to that they need to make their decision, right? So it's not always lowest price, but sometimes we get defensive. And
for sure. So we do it as marketers too, right? Yeah. We get defensive when someone's like, how much are you? And you're like, first, let me figure out if I can help you. Let me sell you the story. Let me sell you the emotions. So you're right. That's always difficult for folks to work with. So, okay. I know that you have a history with obituaries that I think is novel.
Yeah. So
share what you've done there, and like how that is like approachable by people who maybe aren't with obituaries, but maybe with like lists and other things.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about obituaries is that, especially when things started coming online, it would, instead of having just a marketing website, so 20-page website, static, by adding obituaries to the website, it really would increase the traffic. And we have clients throughout North America, and we have some small funeral homes that get 1 million visitors a year to their website. In these smaller towns, that's where people go to see who's died. So they'll even my mom. So my mom wakes up in the morning. She lives here on the West Coast, but she's from Ontario. And she wakes up in the morning, she turns on her computer, she goes to the bathroom, she comes back to the computer after it's booted up, she goes to the local funeral home website and looks to see who's died. Like, it's a connection to the community. Yeah. So now that's not the same in a big metro area like Philadelphia, where you're going to have dozens and dozens of funeral homes. So
but in my hometown, my parents, they looked at two things. I think they looked at who got arrested, right, and then they looked at who died. So I guess you're right.
Yeah. So it's become very valuable. And one of the things that I stumbled upon in the mid 2000s, when I was starting to do some consulting, I'd been selling websites that had, for a company out of Texas, they had online obituaries. But back then, they're all kind of stored in a database, and it wasn't indexed by Google. We weren't really thinking of that, right? We weren't thinking of XML sitemaps or getting all the pages indexed. So when I created my own consulting WordPress site, I published an article, and back then I still have it, but my Google alert for my name, right? And 15 minutes, I got an email, and it said, "Oh, hey, here's your name was just on the internet," and it was the article that I just published, and that was with WordPress. And so it had, the structure of WordPress would was highly indexable, if that's the right term,
Sure.
by Google.
Yeah,
And
WordPress was hot when it came out, right? Because everyone
yeah,
was just like dream weaving sites.
yeah, exactly. Custom HTML. And
Yeah.
then, so I thought, well, I bet you people are looking, because when you hear that someone died, right, you're going to Google their name. Like, oh, I heard Rob died. Oh, Robin Heppell death, Robin Heppell obituary.
Right.
But no one knew that this was going on because no one had obits that were indexed. As soon as we started offering this 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you could start seeing people, the searches were coming in because the word was out, because the obituary usually, might take a number of hours or a day or two, because the death occurs and the family has to choose the funeral home, and then they have to plan the funeral and make the arrangements and then confirm it with whatever the location is. So it could be a day or two. And we've noticed that people would start searching and searching to the point now where we see hundreds of visits per funeral. Even though 50 people might attend this service, there could be 200 people interacting with that obituary, leaving a condolence. And so it's
so you got in front of people. So this idea of like getting obituaries indexed meant that people would find someone who had died. They would see that it came from the local funeral home. Then they would kind of create a mental kind of connection to that funeral home, and that would drive more funeral home business. Is that right?
At least it's giving you more exposure. Right?
For sure.
We can't. It's really hard to measure that, because
the attribution is tough.
Yeah, like 95% of that traffic that goes to that funeral home website is all about obituaries, and only 5% of it, or maybe even less, is about doing business with that funeral home.
Sure.
So you're providing, what I like to say is, you're providing a community service, and you want people to interact within your virtual walls. Mm-hmm. So they're seeing your brand, they're seeing your colors, and maybe there's like a video of the service on there, or we do lots of, or funeral homes will do slideshow tributes, right? So number of photos, like 50 photos from when they're born to, up until when they died, and you put some royalty-free music to it, and any things like that make that honor that person's life.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, cool. So I feel like we've learned a lot about you, and you've got this funeral results marketing, digital marketing agency that you've run for a long time. You've got Funeral Boardroom as well, and you're a fractional CMO. And I'm wondering, you had a time when you weren't a fractional CMO, where you were really in it in these funeral homes. You were supporting on some of the day-to-day operations on the marketing side. Like, you were the guy who was on the inside. And after you've mastered that, you've built teams, you built your agency, and you founded that. But now you're doing this fractional CMO stuff. So what's different between being a fractional CMO for a funeral home versus having an agency that provides services?
Sure. Well, there's the kind of three basic offerings, right? So there's your done for you services, which is our agency. So we develop websites, we host websites, we do Google Ads management, SEO, online reputation, and that's done for you, hands off. You don't have to worry about it.
Great.
And then with the I also have a training site called the Funeral Gurus, and that's where I'll put some training up there. If people ask me a question, I'll post it there, and that's more of a do-it-yourself. So people who want to learn, but they're not going to really engage. But the kind of the done with you is the Funeral Boardroom. So where I would be working somewhat like a consultant, and it with my variety of experiences in funeral service, it could be focused on technology, it could be focused on marketing, it could be focused on strategy, competition, but the nice thing about being a fractional CMO is it provides structure. And where before with Funeral Boardroom, we would just work on it. We would kind of come up with an agreement of what they wanted help with, and I would work them through what they wanted. Where with the fractional CMO, the great thing is, and with help with some of the frameworks that you make available to us, is that there is a system and a process in place, and where we can then become the leader of their marketing services. So with that, then they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to think, oh, like, hey, I'm going to try social media for a couple months and I'm going to try Google Ads, and where we can look at it from top down, make sure that the main things are being looked after, and then tweak the other things, and make sure that there's a process in place, and it makes us more accountable to them. They can, they're not the ones that are having come up with the ideas. As you know, probably more than most, things are always changing. There's different resources out there. And what I think one thing that I provide, and I tell my clients this too, I'm going to tell you the latest things that you could be doing, but I'm also not going to tell you a ton of latest things that aren't going to apply, which could be a real time waste on your end.
Oh, because what comes to mind for me is this idea that it's not what you do, it's what you don't do sometimes.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Don't focus on the stuff that doesn't matter. And if all you're doing is telling someone specifically do these few things, they could be like, wow, that's really simple. You're like, yes, but you're not doing all of the garbage that's going to waste your time and money. I think you're onto something for sure.
Well, yeah, they'll say like, hey, do you think we should do a TikTok campaign? I'm like, no,
absolutely
right not. Now there is in funeral service, there are TikTokers that they're doing their thing, and it's actually very beneficial to attract new people to funerals. Like we need, just like lots of industries and professions, we need more people taking funeral service as a career, and so that's going well. But those are just individuals, and the funeral home's not getting new first calls, because that's our main goal. Right. So we want to make sure that we weed that out and have the goal, and just what's the goal? You want more calls? Do you want more pre-arrangements? Okay, if that's the goal, then we look at the different channels to use and the different strategies to accomplish that goal. But it's not going to be, we should just use social media now, versus why don't we do Google AdWords? And if I just could take a second here.
Yeah.
So Google Ads search, not display, is to get those, we call them at the time of need, or at need deaths, like someone's died or about to die.
And your keywords for this, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a handful of ones that are, that you need. Funeral homes in Philadelphia, probably, funeral costs in Philadelphia, and then different derivatives of that. And obviously it's not just half a dozen, but
sure.
But those are people that are actively searching, they have buying intent, and they need to find a funeral home. So our job is to then get those people who are searching for that, get my client's ad in front of them, and then to a landing page that then leads them through the process to get them to phone the funeral home and win the first call.
Yep.
For social media, social media isn't good for at-need business, or for at the time of death business, but for people who are pre-planning, it's a good place to do it. So maybe you're having an estate planning seminar and you're planning an event, or you're sending out like a funeral planning checklist. So for people who are retiring, because there you're using that interruption or disrupting marketing, where they're just sitting down going through the Facebook page.
No intent.
Yeah, they just see it. They go, oh yeah, my mortality. Yeah, I better, I better make up some arrangements, because I keep it seeing.
I bet those ads don't do very well, right?
Well,
not intent based, just finding people while they're cruising Facebook, looking at fail videos, and now you say oh, you're gonna die. What's your plan?
Yeah, you have to be a little softer than that, and I think that too, Casey, is the art of marketing for funeral service, because we haven't talked about this part yet, but you have to be very cautious, right? And that's there's some things that you don't want to, sure, you could see, we see within industry publications, oh, look at this, creative ad, and okay, sure, it's kind of funny for us to see it, but really, my mom would be offended if she saw some of these things, right? So you need to know the target market of who you're trying to reach, and then what marketing channels you're going to use. So yeah, it's you just need to know what your goal and your objectives are, and then use the appropriate marketing channels.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So let's go to this question, which is, if a funeral home was seeking marketing support, they're going to go look for a marketing agency, and every city has a marketing agency. So they're going to find their local marketing agency and they're going to call them up. What do you see as an issue from hiring a local marketing agency versus an agency that specializes in funeral services?
Well, I think just part of just what I explained of the type of person that you're trying to, like, who are you trying to attract with the marketing is one, and there are a number of sensitivities that are just been ingrained in me growing up, but I also see that they almost are a bit more short term. So as an example, they might offer everything, right? They're going to do branding. They're going to do, we're going to create a style guide for you. Yeah, we'll do a new website for you. And we can make sure the SEO is okay. But they don't know the value of the obituaries. So I've had in, and more than one occasion, have come in the middle or afterwards, and someone will say, hey, we use this local company. I go to Rotary with them, and like we lost all our ranking. And I said, well, I look and like they messed up all the obits. So I've even seen them. We use WordPress, and one of the benefits of WordPress is you can have the same structure and you can just put a new theme on it. And so it looks like a brand new website, but you haven't changed any of the structure and all the history. And because some prominent people who have their obituary, and they could have hundreds of condolences on that, and they might have even a bunch of backlinks coming to that. Well, if you don't preserve that, then it's just gone. Like
you lose all that kind of authority that you've had years and years and years.
Yeah.
Online, it's just so important. Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like news sites do that. They like let news articles disappear, and there's links that go to dead pages. You just can't have that if you want to maintain credibility long term.
Yeah, and it's just basic. And so there's that, and then they'll even, and sometimes these are generational companies, so over time maybe the names change slightly, and what'll happen is they'll go and they'll like, okay, well, we're going to change that domain. We got the new domain for you, and they let the domain die. Oh, and so.
And then some squatter buys it, and then they rebuild the website, have the old contact information, and then they put links over to Viagra or health insurance or something else to get that high quality backlink, and you can never get it back. I've seen that happen, and that's scary.
Yeah. So, and it's just, again, not understanding the whole business and the uniqueness of a funeral home website versus some like a lawyer website. So, or an accountant website. So, here are 3 professional services in town, but 2 of those websites are very similar. And this other one is this huge community service that gets 10, 100 times the traffic. And
that's fascinating to consider the funeral website as the funeral home website is more of a community service. I think that's very unique. You think of a law firm, and that's not a community service.
No, people aren't checking there on a regular. No one's waking up and logging into the local lawyer.
Yeah. What case?
Yeah, exactly. So it's we find this in the kind of the last thing, and this is more on the Google Ads side of it, is because of all this traffic for obituaries, we've had some clients say like, we're spending all this money with this company on Google Ads, and we're getting no business. And I look, and they're bidding on obituary, like they're bidding on the word obituary, because Google will tell you, they suggest it. Well, Casey, no, this is even worse.
Broad match. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So funeral, cremation, cemetery, obituary are all synonymous now. So we heavily rely on negative keywords
You'd have to.
Otherwise, because it's a nightmare. So which keeps us in business, right? Because and it's now hard for the do-it-yourselfer to do it for themselves, right? So it's over time, and again, us really knowing the business that can help them out, and it's not like we're any more expensive than using a local marketing company. We just know more, and there's always the argument of, oh, well, we would just want a fresh approach. Well, okay, you can maybe get a fresh approach from a company, but when it comes down to the mechanics of marketing for funeral services, they're not going to be able to compete or have anywhere near the knowledge that like someone like myself that would bring as a fractional CMO.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And you're not even talking about short-term knowledge that you put together in the last few years. You're talking about generational knowledge and experience and tact and everything. Awesome. So let's pull this to a close. So I feel like I've learned a ton here. I love talking about this stuff because it's like, I don't want to call it dark, right? But it's just not out in the open. No one talks about this stuff. And folks that run funeral homes need support. They need to grow their business. They're not going to, publicly share their revenue like some startups would or something like that, right? Like that's not appropriate, but they still have the same needs. They're still feeding their family. They're still serving their community. They still need the same level of business development and strategy around growth. And it's awesome that you're coming from just kind of a history of that. You've got this pedigree of undertaker all the way through to like digital marketer, all supporting folks through this. And it feels like, I mean, to me, it's unique. I think I know a lot of people in marketing, and you're the only person I know here, and you're at the top. You're the number one. That's why you have the website funeralcmo.com. And you offered folks here, you mentioned that I could share this, that if anyone's interested in growing their funeral home, if they're looking for a CMO in the funeral space, that you'd be open to a 25-minute call, and they can book that at funeralcmo.com/call, funeralcmo.com/call. Rob, this has been awesome. I mean, when I just think of like funeral homes, I just think like all the facts I have in my mind, they all come from you. So I'm really grateful for the time today, man.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad to help, and thanks for the opportunity, Casey.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, take care.
Okay, you too. See ya.
Thank you for joining us for today's show. For more information and episodes, visit our site at fractionalcmoshow.com. Go ahead and punch that like and subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. It means a lot, at least to my mom.